Lesson 31, Section 3. This presentation will be introduced to the genitive absolute and to ways to qualify participles and make it a little clearer whether we're dealing with a participle with explanatory or concessive force. In English and Greek, we sometimes see a clause that is grammatically unrelated to the rest of the sentence. For instance, that being the case, I'm afraid I can't help you. With our best player injured, we don't stand a chance. Each of these clauses is really grammatically unrelated to or unconnected with the rest of the sentence. Each of these is called an absolute construction. Absolute, another way of thinking of it, is independent. These clauses are independent, really, of the rest of the sentence that follows. In Greek, absolute constructions usually feature participles in the genitive case, hence the name genitive absolute. Unlike other participles, the genitive absolute cannot be translated simply as verb plus ing, although we learned that even other participles won't necessarily be translated in this way. But let's look at an example. Autu de hele nos antas. Here we have three parts to this genitive absolute construction. All three of these words here are in the genitive. Autu is a form of autos and basically means he, in this case. Helenos is the genitive for Hellene, Greek, and antos is the genitive masculine singular form for being. So a literal translation of this might be something like he being a Greek. Unfortunately, this being a genitive absolute construction, we're not going to be able to translate it that way, because what comes afterwards is going to be unrelated really to this he. It's going to feature a different subject. So one of the ways to translate this would be we have to supply some actual grammar and make it into really its own clause. Since he is a Greek, or because he is a Greek. Or if we're going for something with concessive force, although he is a Greek. We don't have enough context really here to distinguish between the two possible uses of the participle. Let's look at one other example with a little more complicated grammar. Auton de pausanton ton paleman. So here we have our genitive absolute construction, really this whole phrase here, but in the genitive we have only these two words. Auton is once again a form of the same word we just looked at above, but it's plural, and the pausanton is an aorist participle of the verb pauo. So this might be translated literally as something like they having stopped the war. But again, because this is an absolute construction, we're going to have to make it make sense on its own in English. So since they had stopped the war would be one possibility. And this had stopped would possibly be different depending on the tense of the verb that comes in the main clause afterwards. So this is just one possibility. It might be since or after they stopped the war, or even after they stop the war, they will do something. Lots of different possibilities. It's very dependent on the context. The important thing is that we have had to take what is basically a very literal translation of this genitive absolute, they having stopped the war, and make something grammatically complete out of it in order for it to make sense. Now, let's look at some other kinds of participles. Other Greek participles must also be translated differently than verb plus ing, especially when combined with certain words. So we're going to see some qualifying words that really help to bring out the kind of participle we're dealing with. For instance, hate, since. If we add this to a participle, or if we add a participle to it, hate plus participle, we get something like hate helen on, since he is a Greek. Here there's no ambiguity. We know that it's this participle here, the on, nominative masculine singular form of the participle for eime, I am, is being used to explain something. Hate, qualifies the participle and tells us that this is an explanation for something, since he is a Greek, because he is a Greek. Whereas kai per, although, brings out the concessive force of the participle that follows it. Kai per Hellen on, although he is a Greek. Here again, no ambiguity. This is very helpful, given how much ambiguity is usually there in the grammar of a participial phrase in Greek. Depending on the kind of participle that follows it, hos, which is a third type of qualifier, can have different meanings. Hos plus future participle, which we looked at very briefly recently, can mean something like intending to or with the purpose of doing. For instance, hos pausantes tan poleman apeltan. So here we have pausantes is nominative masculine plural, and it agrees really with the implied subject of apeltan, which is the second aorist form of aperkamai, I go away, I depart. So this is the action that was performed by this they. They went away, they departed. And they departed with the intention of doing this stopping of the war. So one way to translate this would be, intending to stop the war, they departed, or they departed in order to stop the war. We have different ways of expressing this in English, but the important thing to recognize is that we have hos, which is really a way to qualify our participle, plus the future participle being used to convey the intention or the purpose for which something is done. We also have another one, hos plus genitive absolute, which can mean believing or assuming that. For instance, lege hos aku antasmu. So this is a speaker speaking to someone, lege, speak. And then we have this hos aku antasmu. Here this is a genitive absolute construction, as you can see from the color. The aku antas, this is masculine singular genitive, and it agrees with the mu here, the form of ega, I. So we might translate this as something like, speak assuming that I am listening. Now, in general, hos is used to describe the subject's attitude as opposed to the speaker's. So in the first example, the subject of the sentence was this they. So their attitude in leaving or departing was to stop the war. Here, the subject is actually the you being addressed. So you speak on the assumption that I am listening. You can speak knowing that I will listen, would be maybe another way of translating that. Again, the hos is used to describe the subject's attitude and not necessarily the speaker's. Now for further reading on the genitive absolute, an important construction and kind of tricky, you can look at pages 140 to 141 in the grammar. Thank you very much.